Olá, boa tarde a todos. Muito obrigado por virem aqui. Eu espero que o debate valha a pena. Nós temos os nossos 4 convidados connosco. O debate vai se processar da seguinte forma: eu vou fazer uma breve apresentação, depois cada um dos participantes vai fazer uma apresentação de 5 minutos, portanto uma pequena apresentação sobre o assunto em 5 minutos, e depois vai haver um debate com ambos os lados da mesa, portanto à minha direita está o não, à minha esquerda está o sim. O debate vai ser, nessa fase, exclusivamente um debate entre as pessoas da mesa, e depois, numa terceira fase, alargamos o debate para a audiência e qualquer pessoa pode colocar questões. Eu penso que depois a Telma poderá andar com o microfone para que vocês possam pôr questões. Portanto, é isto que se vai passar. O tempo previsto é cerca de 1h30. Espero que seja do vosso agrado. Eu vou mudar para inglês para que agora possa ser compreensível por toda a gente. As evolutionary biologist, I first realized that there's a movement to update modern sciences when the science reported in 2008. So around 2007, 2008, there was a movement of a few people that try to upgrade the modern sciences, and they call it modern sciences 2.0. Then this debate was re-energized last year, exactly 1 year ago, with a Nature comment on the issue, on the do we need an extension of the evolutionary, an upgrade of the evolutionary sciences or not? And the comment was there were the yes side and the no side, and essentially the yes side suggests that we need an extended evolutionary synthesis, and there are 4 reasons for that. One is the developmental bias, the second one is phenotypic plasticity, the third one is niche construction, the fourth one is extragenetic inheritance. And in this issue they divide it into epigenetics and social transmitted behavior. But the problem is not that they only defend these as reasons why we should update the evolutionary synthesis. They also have, above all, a main argument is that these processes also are not only the outcome of evolution, they can cause evolution. And that is the main difference from the no side. For the no side, or what they call the standard evolutionary theory, they have arguments in favor of that. We don't need to upgrade the evolutionary synthesis. And the first is that the standard evolutionary theory was evolving by itself. So it's not new that they integrate different aspects of evolution that came out after the synthesis. And they give several examples. For instance, neutral theory was incorporated in the evolutionary theory. The selfish DNA and the kin selection were integrated in modern synthesis without the synthesis have to change name. So essentially what they are arguing is that we don't need to change the label, because the evolutionary theory can easily evolve to accommodate all new things that came out. The second argument is that all 4 issues that the yes side mentioned that are important are already part of the research framework of the evolutionary biology. So they are not new, they are people researching them, and so this is not different from what the evolutionary biologists are doing. The third argument is that genes continue to be central to the evolutionary process. Genes central for the adaptation, genes central for the speciation process. And the fourth is that argument is that we need more empirical evidence. And the argument here is that for some issues there are still little evidence that support some of the claims that the yes side say that they are true. And one of them is the role of phenotypic plasticity. And both sides agree that phenotypic plasticity is important. But can phenotypic plasticity lead to genetic variation of the evolutionary adaptation? And that is critical, is what we can rephrase in a way that the trait comes first and genes follow. And that is different from both sides. So, and to answer this, we need more evidence to see if there is this claim is correct or not. If you have situations where the trait comes first and then the genes follow the trait. And so to discuss this and have a better perspective than mine on this, we have the yes side on my left. Etienne Danchamp is a professor at the University of Paul Sabatier in Toulouse, France, and is the head of the group of evolution and biological diversity, and his main research interest is in cultural evolution, and so he's an expert in the area of cultural evolution. Susana Varela, also on my left side, is responsible for the course of animal behavior in the biology course of this faculty. And on the no side, on my right side, we have Margarida Matos, that is a professor in the Department of Biology in this faculty. And this his research is on experimental evolution. And Teresa Avelar, that is an evolutionary biologist that in the last few years published a lot of books on Darwin and evolution. So I just present the yes and no side, and now we will have a brief presentation from the yes side, and then 10 minutes for the yes side, 10 minutes for the no side. Okay.
Yeah, I'll take. Maybe I can I plug to the...
I forget something. All this organization was carried out by Thelma Laurentino. That was the brain behind the organization of this, and she was not happy in organizing one. She organized 2 debates. Okay, so that's why we are here, and thank you for organizing this.
Can I have I just wanted to summarize what I said. This was the outline of the talk I gave an hour ago. And I would just want to highlight 2 points of this talk. A summary of the modern synthesis and the historical perspective, just to show, and it will be in the order, inverse order, if I remember. So, historical perspective, I wanted to start from something going back in time with Alexander Weizmann, who separated the notion of so where do I press for here? Is it here? No, this is forward and backward. The central one? Okay, it's too easy. So he invented. Doesn't seem to be working. This one. Okay. Anyway, so he invented the concept of soma. Which we now call phenotype, and the concept of germplasm, which we now call genotype. And these distinctions led to this scheme, which is this diagram, which represents a time running from left to right with 3 generations of individuals. And I want to change it a little bit by tilting it by 90 degrees, so that what we usually call vertical transmission is vertical in the diagram, so it's the same one, just tilted. Then I put the new concept, which are genotypes and phenotypes, and some people are arguing that this is a vision of the modern synthesis of evolution. And I agree with this. It's more complicated than that. But what is important is that this white arrow here is considered as representing the development. The white arrow here. This white arrows development, and you can see that there is a slope here, and this slope indicates that the time for development is significant relative to 1 generation time. And because of this slope, people thought that use this argument to say that there is no way to go from the phenotype to the genotype, because for some reason it is impossible to go from to go back in time. And, but in fact, it's not correct, because we know now that the phenotypes, the genotypes are contemporary. We all are a mixture of these two things. Well, the genotype and the phenotype are together. So there could be possibilities for the phenotype to act on the genotype. And I gave some striking examples in the conference. Also, this diagram led to a very important concept in the modern synthesis of evolution, which is Weismann barrier, which is the idea that the germ cells are sealed off from the environment, protected in a safe, so that there is no environmental influences on them. And I gave obvious evidence with mechanisms that show that really this is not the case. And also some people, as I said, tend to think that this is a good way to describe the modern synthesis of evolution, and I think it is an oversimplification. It is important to realize that we have added two important things. The first one is that the environment is extremely important in developmental processes, acting on this white arrow here. And the second thing is that this effect of the environment on the development is mediated by epigenetic processes, that is, fine-tuning of gene expression during development. So to me, this is more representative of the modern synthesis of evolution. And this is a simplification, as all our models, of course. And I just wanted to, in my talk, I explain how the fact that there are other red arrows linking generations. The first one is animal culture. I give an example in Drosophila melanogaster. The second one is parental effect. I give an example in rats, in rodents. The third one is again in rodents, and it gives striking evidence that there are mechanisms that really are aiming at changing gene expression in the genome of the sperm and sperm cell, and in the genome of the ovum of the females, and that these changes are kept for at least 25 generations in one study. And as I said, just to make a joke, in the end, is that they stopped at 25 generations because they had to publish it. Okay, so clearly there are examples, and they describe mechanisms coming from the brain, sending RNA that go and modify gene expression in the sperm cells or in the ovum, and this is transmitted for at least 25 generations. So clearly this Weismann barrier is wrong, and we should ignore it now. We should accept that this is different. I also said a few words about the fact that there might be some inheritance of the environment. I won't give details here. Another domain which has been studied a lot is niche construction, the fact that individuals are modifying their environment, and in doing so, they are modifying the environment of the next generation, and these different modifications accumulate across generations, and people have modeled this in humans a lot and shown that this is quite influential, and people defending the left column of the paper that Octavio was showing. I've modeled this a lot and shown that this can be quite influential. And in a paper that is submitted, which is in a review in Nature Review Genetics, we're talking about genetic assimilation. It is important to realize that epigenetic processes can modify the mutability of some specific genes. There are papers that clearly state that the methyl radical, which is fixed on the DNA molecules, are mutagens. And they can increase the mutation rate by a factor of 20,000. So clearly, we are speculating and providing examples and argument for the fact that there might be some possibility to accelerate, and we even provide a model that shows that we can accelerate the genetic engraving when there is a change in the environment by a factor 20,000, the same factor as the mutagenic effect. So the view I see of the inclusive evolutionary synthesis, and you can notice I use the expression inclusive evolutionary synthesis and not extended evolutionary synthesis. I can explain why later during the discussion if you want. So clearly this is a canonical vision, the one which is mostly argued, defended at the moment, and which is quite different from the previous one. Okay, and now I just want to say a few words about this scale of time. It's clear that in the modern synthesis we accept the idea that the phenotype recapitulates several things. The first thing is the history of the individual since it was fertilized, so through phenotypic plasticity, learning, etc. So this is classic, and this occurs during development. We also accept the idea that we are the result of the engraving in our genes of information from many generations ago, on the left side of this diagram. And this is, to me, the vision of the current synthesis of evolution. And once you formulate things like this, you realize that there is a big gap here. There is apparently no possibility for recent ancestors to really transfer information to the next generation or to grandchildren, etc. It's amazing in terms of logic, because this is the most up-to-date information about the environment. Why should we ignore the most recent information? It doesn't make sense to me. And my goal in my talk was to fill this gap, which I hope I managed to do a little bit, by showing examples, examples in parental effects that move the border a little bit, inherited environmental effects, several, maybe hundreds of generations are influenced, animal culture that we showed with model that this can develop across more than 100 generations. You can see that the scale, horizontal scale here is in log, so 7 means 10 million generations before. It's quite a wide range. And my goal was to show that the phenotypes also recapitulate the history of more recent ancestors, and this is through non-genetic inheritance. And then, when I draw this diagram, I realized, here is Darwinism. Oh, I said, no, it's not Darwinism. It's neo-Darwinism, modern synthesis. Okay, this is here. And then I wondered, what about this place? What is above non-genetic inheritance? And suddenly, I realized I could call it neo-Lamarckism. And suddenly I realized there is no more tension between these two approaches. They are dealing with different time scales. And you have a hat on this, which is Darwinism, because Darwin was really Lamarckian. He wrote a lot of sentences that were unambiguous about this. He was more Lamarckian than Lamarck. But also he had a much broader vision of inheritance, much closer. Well, I'm imitating him. I'm coming back to his vision somehow. I'm defending the same kind of vision. So another thing I said rapidly at the end, and I'll say rapidly here, is the fact that if you want to model informational dynamics, that is the goal of any evolutionary model, isn't it? In a world like this, or in a world like that, it's clear that the equations that will describe these systems won't be the same. There is no way they can be the same. They have to be quite different, meaning that the properties of the systems might be quite different. Maybe we're talking of completely different stories. This is a bit provocative, and if I want to finish with one point, just to be a little bit more provocative, one really important concept that was created by mathematicians ages ago is a concept of emergent properties. The fact that the properties of the whole thing is more than the sum. Oh, sorry, there was a mistake. The sum, it should be SUM. I just wrote it while Octavio was writing, so I didn't have the time to correct. So the sum of the properties of its components. And a good example is the brain and our thoughts. A consequence of this is clear that if you want to study the properties of the whole thing, you have to use different tools, different approaches than the one to study the components of it. And in the case of the brain and thoughts, it would be quite difficult and probably impossible to be able to explain what I'm telling to you now and my thoughts by just taking electrodes and trying to see how my neurons are working. And to study thoughts, use completely different approaches, such as philosophy, psychology, a lot of things, linguistic, a lot of sciences like this, which are using completely different approaches, different tools. And what I want to say is that we have to accept that the presence of genetics allowed the emergence of properties at the level of the whole genome and the whole organism that just escaped genes. These are emergent properties. And one of the emergent properties of genetics is non-genetic inheritance, social learning. I can learn from others just because I got the genetic capacity to learn from others. But this led to a new system of transmission, of inheritance, of transmission across generations. Okay, and I wanted to say just at the end, if I want to push the arguments, it's just to provoke the discussion. Often when I give lectures, people tell me, oh yes, but in the end, everything boils down to genes. This is denying to me the notion of emergent property, but I want to push it a step further. Say, well, you're right. You're right. In the end, everything is a matter of genes. But by the way, genes are made of molecules, which are made of atoms, which are made of neutrons, and so on. And in the end, the smallest particle is quarks. So what you're in essence saying is that we should explain everything with quarks. And to me, it doesn't make sense, because there are several levels of emergent properties, from the quarks to atom and so on, that make it almost impossible to explain everything by studying quarks. This is my point. But it's a provocation. And I think the same reasoning can be holds for genetics. Yes, genes are involved, definitely, but they are so fantastic that they created a system that escaped to them somehow.
Susana, you are okay. Susana, não? Passa. Okay. First.
So, hello. I don't have a prepared text to defend the no position, and I think that we probably all agree that there are interesting new facts and discoveries since the modern synthesis was elaborated in the 40s. What we might disagree on is whether this implies that evolution needs a rethink, because many of these new ideas, which are supposed to demand a rethink, were actually relatively old. I mean, the fact that organisms change their environment was the argument of Darwin from the start, and he even wrote a book on earthworms changing their environment so much that they could sink monuments like Stonehenge. The idea that behavior is important in evolution, and sometimes it's a difference of behavior which can lead to difference in selective pressures and then genetic change, was defended by Ernst Mayr in a book in the 60s, and he is one of the architects of the synthesis. The idea that there are the effects of the phenotype are much bigger than just the body of the organisms, and they extend further, like constructions of beaver dams or termite hills or big nests or such. This was defended by Dawkins, which is considered a fanatical ultra-Darwinist, and he wrote a book on the extended phenotype saying that sometimes effects are much larger than just the organism. And he also wrote about cultural evolution with this idea of memes, which I don't find in itself very useful, but it shows that the idea that behavioral transmission was considered by the most narrow-minded gene defenders like Dawkins. So my argument is only that some of these new discoveries may be very interesting, but they do not need a complete rethink. They are just adds, because of course we know more things than Darwin did, or know more things than the architects of the synthesis did. Of course, because that's the point of change in science. But change is one thing, and a revolution in thought is another. And I don't think that we have arrived at a point where a complete rethink is needed. But of course, saying that Darwin was wrong is the thing that sells magazines and people pay attention. And probably there wouldn't be so many people here if the title was not so apparently earth-shaking. If we just gather together and say, okay, let's discuss some new ideas in evolution, maybe some of you wouldn't have come because it's not so eye-catching. So I think that the rest of the arguments we can then discuss.
Okay, so I'm also for the no. We are in a very good health. I think that the scientific community in evolutionary biology is a very open-minded community. So I think that every time that something exciting appears, it is considered, and scientists are interested in understanding more about this very complex process, which is evolution. So I think that there's no evolutionary biologist that doesn't understand that evolution is a very complex process. But we have to simplify things sometimes. So I think it's not fair that several points that are mentioned here in the yes, I think they are not being fair with the community because they oversimplify in terms of it gives the idea that the gene comes first and so it's the cause and then the phenotype evolves, which is not what is considered. So there are several levels and these levels have to be approached in several steps. So this is the scientific methodology. So we have to simplify and then we include more and more levels. So identify several of these issues, but I may not be fair completely, but I identify several of these arguments as tackling what is really issues of integrating, of interaction between levels. For instance, the phenotypic plasticity issue, it is obviously not correct. So since Darwin, so we know that it's the environment, the changes in environment promote new variation without necessarily having mutations, which means that the same genotype in different environments have different expression, right? So the differential, which is the basic of the evolutionary process, the differences between genotypes change from one environment to another. And that's the first reason why population can adapt to a new environment. So the very source of the evolutionary process in the neo-Darwinian paradigm is phenotypic plasticity. So this, for me, is the most unfair argument. You might say, no, but it's not phenotypic plasticity per se, it's the phenotypic plasticity being the cause of the evolutionary process in the sense that it's the phenotype that makes changes in the genotype directly. So, that would go to the other level, which would be the epigenetic level, which is it possible that the environment affecting the phenotype makes a change in the DNA sequence? I'm not saying the gene expression, because gene expression is volatile. You can change it from one moment to the other. It can stay for 25 generations, but does it mean it is a qualitative change? Can you have a new function due to an epigenetic process? I think that till now there's not one single example. If one appears, I'm completely sure that the scientific community, which is on the side of the no, will take it as very interesting, even if it is just one single case, but it will be interesting. I'm not saying that the entire building of evolutionary biology will fall and that we have to change the paradigm, but it will be interesting. But till now, if I'm correct, there's not one single example of that. The other issue might be genetic assimilation, might be interesting for plasticity. Again, I think that there have been several works trying to find it, and I'm not convinced of a single one. So again, I think it's not very convincing. But then moving on, so basically what I think is that there are several levels of interactions that complicate the picture, but it's not fair that evolutionary biologists on the side of the no don't take it as seriously. I would say that, for instance, the eco-evo-devo level, by itself, this phrase shows that everybody in evolutionary biology is interested in several levels, in interactions, in loops, okay, in feedbacks. So it's impossible to say that this is outside, because if it was outside the evolutionary biology today, it would mean that evolutionary biology would be really lousy, very bad. So it's not true. Another level that the yes doesn't tell is epistatic interactions. So why not consider that one issue that is recurrent in the literature and recurrent in models, in studies, is that epistatic, the interactions between genes, are so complex, and how can we approach them? And many times the models simplify this. Does this mean that the theory needs a rethink? Nobody says that. Why? So why isn't it troublesome to simplify the genetic level, but it's troublesome to simplify the interaction between the genes and the environment, or the genes and the individuals and the social level and all of that? So I think that this shows the simplification, that the methodology is to simplify and gradually get things done. And this is shown by the many studies that now, with the genome-wide level and the transcriptomic level, are allowing to start tackling this important issue, which is the epistatic interactions. And I think that I already spoke too much, but so basically my idea would be, okay, so this is finally, just I cannot resist. Of course, nobody agrees that the whole is the sum of the parts. So that, I think, is it's not fair to say.
Okay, so first comment. You notice I'm not a co-author of this paper, okay? And I'm quite happy not to be one of these, because I agree with you in most of what you said, okay? So clearly and to be honest, I think it's not our role, we current biologists, current scientists, to decide if it is a revolution or not. This will be decided in the future. We're not in a position, we're too involved, we're too in conflict of interest, because I suspect these people want the power. And also I want this paper like a kind of situation in which you've got two deaf who are talking to each other. Okay, so they ignore each other. They're just talking, and they don't listen to the argument of the other. I don't want to be part of this. And I was fortunate that they didn't contact me, and it was quite, because it would have been difficult I would probably have said yes in the beginning, and I hope that in the end I would have said no, I don't want to participate to this. Anyway, so that's the first point. So I think we are much closer than you thought. One of the arguments that was said is that many of the arguments, recent arguments, were said by Darwin. This is absolutely true, and well before Darwin. Even Lamarck was saying this. Even Erasmus Darwin, Charles Darwin's grandfather, was a transformist, and he already had some of these arguments. So it's a long story. But the point is that in the meantime, since Darwin, we've tended to reduce more and more inheritance to genetics, that is DNA sequence, nothing else. We've done this all the time. And this is what we've engraved in our students. I've been taught this, and I've taught this to my students all the time. And the very first time I heard about non-genetic inheritance, and more exactly cultural inheritance, I said, what the F about it? What do you mean? Doesn't make sense. It's crazy. I was completely genocentric. So clearly, it's true that all this has been said before. But there are two different reasons. We've reduced our vision of inheritance, and we have to reopen it. And in a paper we wrote with Richard Wagner, we sort of a subtitle which was Back to Darwin from Neo-Darwinism. So I entirely agree with this. This was said. And there is a second difference which is really important, which is the fact that now we know a lot more about the mechanisms. And Susanna was saying to me just before the start of this, that she thought of something quite clever, actually, that in fact this story of the brain producing microRNA, double-stranded microRNA, that will go into the germ lines and modify gene expressions in a way that it's transmitted across generations, it's exactly what Darwin was describing with his pangenesis. He talked of not of double-stranded microRNA. He was talking about gimels, but it's really similar somehow. It's funny suddenly. I hadn't thought of this. So yes, clearly, we are reinventing the wheel somehow, but we know why we are reinventing, and we know more about the mechanisms. So it's a completely different context. But yes, we have to reopen our mind. Another thing which I've never said, and if I said a word that meant this, please forgive me. I've never said that Darwin was wrong. I hope I've never said this. So clearly, Darwin, he was a darling to me. Darwin was right as much as Lamarck was right, and I don't want to get into these discussions, but it's important to realize that Darwin was born the year Lamarck published his fundamental paper, the first that really formalized the idea of transformism, which we now call evolution.
Can I just come here just for a second? Because so how I see the difference between Darwin and Lamarck is not about the inheritance of acquired traits. It's about the tree of life. So Lamarck was wrong, because for Lamarck there was a progress. So there was no degrees of freedom, right? So you just had every organism was different from another, because some were generated by spontaneous generation earlier than others. So the big thing. So Darwin is the big the father of evolution biology. Lamarck is not. So for me that's the difference. So when I read The Origin of Species, I understand he had a struggle, right? Because he needed to compensate for the lack of understanding of inheritance. The fact that if there was a mixture between the differences between father and mother every generation, it would be lost. So he had to have a system to renew the variation, and that was the inheritance of acquired traits. But he was very careful in every time he spoke of it. He said that the main mechanism that will direct this variation that is random is selection. And he also said that inheritance is essential for the process. And he also said, I'm ignorant about the laws of heredity. So I think if he knew the laws, he would drop the inheritance of acquired traits. He wouldn't need it.
Okay.
That's my idea.
Yeah, I agree with your point.
Just to add something, another reason why Lamarck was wrong is that he had this idea of a tendency of improvement. Yes. And this does not exist, and that's why that's why we go back to Darwin and not to Lamarck, because the idea of evolution, Lamarck had it, Erasmus Darwin had it, probably others had it, but as long as it had some mysterious, non-natural tendency to improve, it's not evolution as we understand it.
Of course, you know this. This was more. I understand that when you say Lamarck and Darwin the same, it's about inheritance of acquired traits. I was just saying this for the sake of clarity here, but I'm sure that you agree with us, of course.
Yeah, I think we agree mostly. There is one point in which I disagree with you. Every time when you look at someone's work, you have to place it in the context when it was written. Yeah, sure, it was written 50 years before Darwin, Lamarck, and agrees that a lot of things he said were wrong. But what he did that was correct is that he formalized the idea that species evolved across generations of change.
Sure.
He
No
didn't
one
say
can
evolve, transform.
take merit, yeah, sure.
He did this. So he described a pattern, and then he was right in this. He was wrong in explaining the mechanisms. And Darwin was right in explaining the mechanism, and this was a fantastic idea of the idea of natural selection. But it's the same thing, if I may make a parallel with the guy, Wegener, I think it was, who proposed that the continents are moving on plate, and that led, it was in the 1920, I think, when he said this. Oh, everybody said he was wrong. Because at that time, people said Lamarck was wrong. He was crazy to say things because God had created things the way they were. And Lamarck was saying something different. So at that time, Wegener said this, and it's Xavier Le Pichon in 1964 that rejuvenated this. But he did this by proposing a mechanism that explained why plates tectonics was happening. So it's the same thing between Lamarck and Darwin. And again, Le Pichon would not have existed without Wegener, as Darwin would not have existed without Lamarck. Lamarck, who was writing the things that were some people were thinking about, and I said that the grandfather of Darwin was already transformed. So clearly, I disagree when you say that Lamarck was wrong, because Darwin was wrong in many things, in understanding how it functions. But amazingly, suddenly you realize that some of his intuitions were not that crazy. Some of the mechanisms we're discovering resemble this pangenesis stuff. And it's quite shocking. I have to think about it. Okay. Another thing, I think we have been trapped in this reduction of what I call genocentrism. And we have to reopen our mind, shatter the walls of the trap. We needed to do it, by the way. I agree entirely. We needed to simplify for several decades our vision of inheritance, and we reduced it to DNA sequence. But now we have to reopen it. And facts are accumulating every day in top-ranking journals showing showing some directions, okay? In a way to reopen. Another thing I want to say is that the inclusive, what I call the inclusive modern synthesis, inclusive evolution and synthesis, is not denying the reality of the modern synthesis. And may I have another comparison? When Newton was there, he was describing the system, gravity and so on. He had his laws. And by the way, we still use these laws. Okay? When we send a satellite to go to the moon, we don't use generalized relativity. It would be crazy to do it. We don't need it. So it's still valid. Okay? But then the general relativity generalized this idea to more general situations, and I think it's the same thing which is happening now. We are kind of generalizing this. But again, it's not us to decide whether it's a revolution or not. I never pronounce this word. Because this is not our role. It's in the future. Historians will look at our period and they will decide. It's not our role. I don't feel unhappy with this. I'm happy to discover, and every time I discover a new paper about these things, I say, oh my God, it's even worse than I thought. It's even more non-genetic than I thought.
So I'm not sure that we are completely staying on the side of the yes and the no. Just to remind that here, the starting point here in this nature provocation, let's say, tackled several levels. So I'm a little bit curious to know what is your side about the other. So because you are speaking also always about the extra genetic inheritance. What about the rest of the? Do you share this view about the rest?
I was quite explicit about this. I said I didn't want to be involved in this.
So are we discussing the paper, or are we? Because that's the idea that. The initial idea was to discuss whether evolutionary theory needs a rethink, and one of the things that this article says, that we are fighting for the very soul of the theory. It's not a tempest in a tea room.
Okay.
And we on this table are much closer than those in the Nature article. But
Yes, I have to confess that me and Susanna are doing made choice copying in Drosophila, and it's fantastic. So yes, but anyway, I think that even just sticking to one of the four critics, you stick to it. So yeah, which is the extra genetic inheritance. So my question here would be: so do you have a single example that the extra genetic inheritance causes a crisis in the building of those that are more the standard view, something unexpected that happened that is not explained by the general paradigm of evolutionary biology?
So now you were asking me about my prediction about what the historians in 50 years from now will say about our period.
no,
That's what
we're
you're
asking
me.
about an example.
No.
A concrete example like the ones we have of natural selection changing the phenotype of Darwin's
Okay,
finches
so
or-
okay.
Okay. Yeah, we are not. It's not rhetoric. It's
No, but
really.
I've got two things. I want to say first that my prediction is that they will probably say yes, something happened starting in the middle of the years 2000. Something changed. But this started at least in the 1970s, because there are books about these histories, about cultural inheritance in humans. Unfortunately, they sold it. It only came from human sciences, so it's been ignored by evolutionary biologists, which is a pity. But they were already tackling very interesting questions. Okay. An example of what we're doing, I think I gave some example about what we've been doing about in Drosophila melanogaster, and the summary of what we've been doing is the conclusion is that we are now in a position to claim that Drosophila melanogaster has got all the cognitive capacities to transmit mating preferences, sexual preferences across generations through cultural transmission. We don't say that this happens. We say that they have the cognitive capacity to do it. Drosophila melanogaster have got a minute brain. So if we write, it means that a lot of organisms have got the capacity to transmit information across generations culturally. And suddenly, the question of culture is not limited to humans and a few apes, but it goes much further back in time. Okay? One thing. And to reply to your example, I think you're asking a very interesting question. Because my opinion is that, for instance, one of you said, I don't remember which one said this, but are there examples of situations in which it's been shown that epigenetic change can lead to mutations and so on, etc.? There is some evidence. We've got a paper which is in review, which is in revision actually, in Nature Review Genetics about this. There are some really good evidence that there is a systematic link between methylation and genetic variation. And there is a bunch of literature, I said it, that shows that methylation and epigenetic change can lead to actual epigenetic change, and we propose in this paper that in fact the environment might be directing somehow mutations, which is a sin in the context of the modern synthesis.
Just a clarification. It's not just the mutation rate that increases, it's really a direct change?
No, the mutation rate changes.
The mutation rate.
The mutation rate changes. The mutation itself is not directed. The mutation rate changes in specific areas. So it's directed. The place where mutations will occur will be specific areas of the genome that have been involved in the adaptation to this environmental change. So somehow the environment is acting on this. But just to finish this, we are actually currently developing a model with the goal of showing that there can be evolution without a change in genetics, and at least in the first time, and in the first step, and then that if you prolong this for several generations, enough time, then this will accelerate the engraving into the genes. And in this paper I've just said a few words about, we propose a model that shows this, that if the mutagenic effect of methylation in particular can lead to the engraving, an acceleration of the engraving into the genes by a factor equivalent to the mutagenic effect. So what is documented is 20,000 times, so it may be able to accelerate genetic engraving by
so,
this.
but I would say that so any process that accelerates mutagenesis can promote more genetic variation. So I would say, okay, so the
that is open to selection.
The quantity of variation available for what is important. I'm being ironic, okay? Mm-hmm. So the paradigm that the yes are saying that is wrong, which is that it starts with genetic variation, okay, and then selection promotes evolution. So what you are saying is that you only by some process increase that genetic variation because it's stochastic, it's random. So I would say, okay, that's good because there will be more genetic variation, but also mutagens, radiations. So what, I would say, what's the big, you see?
I can understand your point. Yeah. It's not a big difference there. Okay. Well, it depends. When you start modeling this, I'm studying a lot with philosophers and modelers as well, and they think that they're not clear about the fact that this will lead to a completely deep change or not. So this is not my role to decide whether it is.
Yeah, but
I've got my own opinion.
What would be really new was the environment inducing precisely those changes in the genes.
That's what I'm saying.
Which would be adaptive in that environment. And this has not been shown. The only thing...
No, I'm sorry. This is what I'm saying. I'm saying that I think that the goal of the project we're starting it in relation with the Gulbenkian Institute of Science in Lisbon, we're starting this to show that, yes, the epigenetic stage is the first step that can accelerate the engraving into genes, but again, through natural selection. Mm-hmm. No doubt about this. So what is changed is that random mutations are not random in the genomes, they occur in specific regions because the ones that change their methylation patterns are the ones that are involved in the adaptation, immediate adaptation to the environmental change. So it's non-random in this vision, but the mutation itself is random and then selection is there. Definitely, no problem.
And another thing that when you say, which is very interesting, that Drosophila has the cognitive capacity for copying or cultural
transmitting
change.
And
but
creating.
This, again, it's not entirely new because there was a big discussion in the 70s about sympatric speciation and host race shifting in insects. And the whole idea was that initially a female would lay her eggs in the wrong host, the one that was not typical for that species. And then, because there was behavioral imprinting, and the adults come back to lay eggs in the same kind of plant where the caterpillars or whatever fed, this was an entirely cultural change without initially...
It's not cultural in my
well,
definition.
Then it was a change which was not due to different genes,
right.
Was different behavior, different imprinting, and it could be transmitted over thousands of generations and lead to genetic difference between races and eventually speciation. I know it's not what you would call a cultural change, but it's a case where an insect is having different behaviors due to a kind of learning and not due to different genes. So we already knew that.
This is a good example, and I agree. There are similarities between the two cases, and I remember of an experiment of a guy whose name, the name is just gone, it's a short name. Anyway, we did this in Drosophila. He had them live on, they could choose between two different habitats, and in 40 generations, they were obsessed by one habitat, not the other one, and he was speculating about the fact that this could lead to speciation and etc. So that's really interesting. There, it's a different mechanism, definitely different mechanism, but it's in some ways similar, and it's non-genetic again. This can influence. But my argument, it's behavior being important in the system. That's all.
Can I say something?
Oh, no.
I want to say something related with this idea that this is not new or something is not new, and of course it's not. The history is there, and I think the beauty of all this discussion is because it's not completely new. We are in the moment now. What is new for me is that we are now in the moment of, we have enough information now to see patterns, to see, okay, we have accumulated a lot of evidence of cultural evidence, of imprinting, that's the kind of learning you were talking about. Imprinting is very important because when the animals learn, they fix that kind of behavior. So it's the type of vertical transmission that is important for a learned trait to be transferred for many generations. So we know that imprinting exists for a very long time, but we are now and only now seeing all these patterns, accumulating all these evidences, and now we are discussing if we need to improve our theory. And I think that we need to improve our theory, not because we are saying new things. No, we are saying things that you knew already, but now we know they are important. And if we don't improve our theory, we will not teach our students to look into these patterns. As Etienne was saying, we only teach to our students genetic inheritance. They arrive to the third year of
in a simplified way.
In a simplified way. So they arrived to the third year of their graduation only with the knowledge of genetic inheritance, only. So I think that these very old ideas that we're now acknowledging that their importance should be incorporated in a more explicit way in the theory of evolution in order to give them the importance they have. Because if you not incorporate them, we will never give them the importance. And so many students will never study these patterns. And I think this is the key element here. We will not be destroying anything. We will be just saying, okay, genes are really the most important fact, but other things also exist, and you should study them as well. And teach us new things that will come from this. So this is my opinion, and why this discussion is so important. And I think that perhaps we should open the debate.
I just want to add something. It depends on, of course we should teach that to our students, but people like me who have taught, for instance, in behavioral ecology, I taught all that to my students, and I gave them lots of examples of differences of learned patterns even in insects. Like the one classic example from Tim Bergen in the 50s, the sand wasp learning where its nest is and learning how many caterpillars it should put into it. So if you are teaching population genetics, you are teaching about genes. If you are teaching about behavior, of course you are teaching all those things. If you are teaching ecology, you are going to teach that organisms modify their environment and sometimes have an enormous effect. And in ecology, it used to be called ecosystem engineers and things like that. So these things are already taught, but maybe not in a course on population genetics. But population genetics is hard enough without all these extras. So once again, we can simplify, but not down to the level of quarks. That's what Dawkins calls greedy reductionism, and nobody actually does that.
Yeah. I said I was provocative. Teresa, welcome into the inclusive evolutionary synthesis.
Maybe now someone wants to ask some questions.
Hi. So first of all, I'd like to say that Thelma again organized an interesting thing, and I'm very happy for her and for us. Second, I'm going to side with the no. And why? First, evolution of cultures has always been studied. Indeed, since the Greeks. And Vico and then Comte, and before him Saint-Simon, and then Wundt, all of them talked about this. So this is really a very old thing. You cannot say it has never been joined to genetic evolution, because it has. There are many studies by Boyden Richardson, Durham, which are properly called co-evolution. So
Yeah, I know this.
of course you know.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's nothing new, really.
Yeah.
Second,
Again, it's not our role.
second thing, niche modification. It is also it has always been known. Even in an area which interests me, which is the evolution of humans, this has always been taken into account, and only odd fellows like Crasset, for instance, used to say that Darwinism has nothing to do with human evolution. But it has always been known that there is a cycle between niche modification and further pressures for the brain to grow.
Exactly, yeah.
So this is not new again.
Yeah, but it's not integrated into the...
Okay,
that's the point.
I come to it, yes. Now, what really is new for me would be that you can prove that the barrier between soma and germ can be pierced. Now, but even if you could, and this is the main thing I want to say, there would be a philosophical problem, rather a logical problem. Suppose you put an organism into a new environment, and somehow this environment changes genotype into something which is adaptive. The odds that this would happen by chance are nil, virtually. So there would have to be some internal organization of the genes themselves to be acted upon in that particular way to that particular environment. So any epigenetic adaptive modification of genes certainly has to be pre-wired, where in the genes themselves. So philosophically, logically, it is impossible. And further,
it's impossible, but it's been demonstrated. And there are good papers about this.
I know.
In trends, I can send you papers, 2 papers in trends in molecular medicine, for instance, published early this year.
Okay.
And
so
there is a full scheme I showed to the students in my talk before that is describing all the steps for this to be fulfilled. And most of these arrows are demonstrated, and many of them in humans. You can read the papers. Sharma's paper is a really short paper. It's 2 pages.
I'm used to reading long
yeah.
papers. I will go to you after, and I'll take a note, really. But, well, you say so, but then the no says not. So, we don't know, really. And I also read the Nature paper.
No. It's been demonstrated.
It was
seriously.
demonstrated.
It's a paper. The first paper was in PNAS, etc. Well, you can always criticize. If you don't want to believe to something, I've been rejected recently for a paper, and the editor and one of the referees says, I don't believe in it, so off. Well, if this is science, I don't have any problem, but this is not science for me.
No,
science is facts.
Yes, that is not science. Okay, so I'll read the papers. Finally, but this is really only something I want to say to Susanna. Yes. Where is it? I don't know. Anyway, it was this. Even when something is, some change is maintained because of imprinting itself is determined by genotype. So, really, I can't see what's new here, unless you can show me those papers you talked about. On the plus side, I agree. You have to talk about genetic inheritance and cultural inheritance. But then, what did Ayala do but that? he still talks about a couple of years ago, he was still talking about it. So really, and Ayala is one of the three guys that promoted the new synthesis. So really, what's new? I'm sorry to be so blunt, but really.
I think the key element here is that when an animal inherits a behavior by imprinting or social learning, he will act on his environment in a different way. He will change his behavior. By acting differently in the environment, the social and non-social environment, he will change the selection pressures over that environment. And by doing this, he's having an important impact over what is happening to the other individuals of that environment. And so this is what Etienne explained, is the phenotype having an effect backwards into the genotype. Because when females learn to choose mates in a different way than their ingrained genetic preference, they will be exercising a new type of selection over a new group of individuals that they didn't prefer in the first place. So the males that are producing offspring will be different kind of individuals, you see. So the phenotype, the behavioral phenotype of those of the females is having is producing a selection pressure over the males, and this can cause genetic change in the males' population.
So I agree, and that is interesting, but that isn't a revolution. I'm sorry. That is continuity.
But we didn't say it's
well, okay, but,
you say it's
perhaps you didn't say, but
no,
it
but
is sold everywhere as
such. It's not
such.
incorporated in the evolutionary theory. The evolutionary theory talks exclusively about genes and that animals inherit genes and so on. It's not there. So I think we need to put it there, only this. And the change we are asking is this change, is to explicitly put this into the theory.
But I'm sorry, but Ayala already did.
Who?
Ayala, Francisco Ayala already did. Dobzhansky, Ayala, and Stebbings.
Yeah. But just to say, the point you raised about the philosophical point, you're right that there is you cannot accept any new idea, you cannot accept a new change and react immediately and engrave it immediately in the genes. That would be dangerous. And the process we're proposing of genetic assimilation is a long-term process. It's only working over many generations. Okay, because it takes time, and it takes time to the environment to show that this change is for good. You understand? Yeah, I know. But in the interpretation of genetic assimilation, Waddington's experiments is more than 60 years. The interpretation is that there was hidden variation that is revealed. What we're saying is that no, the environment generates this variation, what Teresa was saying. So it's a different process. So it accelerates the system a lot, but not too much. It has to be slow enough, otherwise you can't engrave something if it is sure forever. Otherwise you can't come back. She doesn't want to run too much.
So I'm not a biologist, I'm a philosopher of biology, okay? This gives you a kind of background. For me, I have to say, to render the debate a war in between, let's say, Lamarck and Darwin is a little bit trivial, I would say. And also, I would notice a bias because on the left side of the table, what basically your argument is that there is nothing new because it was already said in the history of biology, which is, again, in my opinion, a little bit trivial. So my question to you would be, what would you need in order to change idea about the basics of, well, let's say the structure of the modern synthesis, given that, first of all, the concept of random mutation was never conceptually defined properly in your field, given that the examples of creative action of natural selection are so few, maybe there is none at all, I don't know, but and given that it was never demonstrated that there is no induction on the part of the environment, for example, in the case of bacterial mutation. So, but this is another point, but what I would, my question is, what would be, you know, this discovery moment that would make you change your mindset?
I think that we already said it several times, and we are discussing an example here and at the end of the last intervention, which would be a directed process from the epigenetic process that would per se cause a new function in the genes that would be adaptive. That would be a blow in terms of the position of the no. So that would really be at the core of evolution biology, which states that the basic source is random mutations, and then natural selection comes into place. So getting from the phenotype to genotype in an efficient way, so not just promoting mutation, because we already know that can happen from the environment. So promoting this in a directed way, which would be would reduce the importance of natural selection per se. So I think that.
So if there is a case like this, as it was already said, then you should change
from,
your
from the phenotype
then you
to
should change your
genotype,
mind.
yes. But I wouldn't say that even. I would say that even one single example would be really very strong, and I don't think there's a single one yet. No. About
No,
a directed process that would promote a gene to become adaptive to the environment.
This is exactly the
really
goal.
Lamarckian.
This is exactly the project we are developing. So.
No, but we are
No,
asking for an
we are in the
example,
preliminary
not for a,
approaches,
for
yeah.
a, for a,
But there are
for a
examples, but they are not as. An argument often is to say, well, when there is a result like this, oh, something is wrong, or you can interpret it another way. So I just want to make a joke about this. In what we did about the evolution of cultural evolution in Drosophila, one major element is conformism, behaving as a majority. And once you realize it, you input it into the model, suddenly you've got the emergence of fads, preferences for something. It emerges immediately. So what I want, and one consequence of this is that conformism is a fantastic correcting mechanism. It's the equivalent of all the mechanisms that correct errors in DNA replication and so on. It's a fantastic process. And I want to say that without conformism, there is no science. We need to be resistant to new ideas. So this debate is part of science. Because if we accepted any new idea, even silly, immediately, there would be no science immediately, okay? So conformism is part of this. And this debate, and this paper, the right side of the paper, the column on the right side, is clearly conformist vision. And the other one claims to be, okay, but I think it's just claiming. Okay, that's all.
I completely agree.
They're hand-waving somehow.
Well, I was thinking that we as scientists, we have a big role in the society, I think. And sometimes we put ourselves apart. And I was wondering about this relevance of culture and all these things that are not clearly included in evolution normally, although we talk about, like you said before.
Can you speak up?
Okay. Should I say from the start? So I think that we have, we scientists have a big role in the society, and what we say is considered very important, right? And I was thinking that this discussion of, that as Susanna was saying, so there are things that we already know for a long time, but are not explicit in the theory. And I was thinking the effect it can have on the society. For instance, I think in general people give a big relevance for genes, and I'm not saying that they don't have, but people say things that that only are related with genes. Society give big relevance to genes and forget about of the rest. And it can lead to a path that is dangerous when, and we saw that in history, that can explain behaviors, explain, for instance, in human it happens, explain things by genes. And I was wondering if including this new culture and all this stuff, it would not be important, it would not have a big impact, not only for us that study science, but for the society.
That's a very good question, I think. I never finish my classes, my lectures, without tackling questions of philosophy. There is no way, and I work with philosophers a lot. We biologists have to talk about this. We have to be conscious that biology is us. So we have to talk about this. I think I agree with your first statement about the fact that we have a big role in the society. I think we're not heard enough. I don't know. It would be difficult to reply to this. But yes, we have a role. We have words to say about it. I've been struck about less than 10 years ago when our president, named Nicolas, I'll let you decide about the family name, decided that we would, he didn't use the word, but phenotype the kids early in life and qualify them as either at risk, didn't say at risk of what, or not at risk. And the fate of these students, these young kids, would be different in the society according to this phenotyping early in life. I can bet you I would have been qualified of at risk, highly at risk. And many people in this audience would have been qualified highly at risk. My point is that in France, there is a tendency, I don't know in this country, the tendency of the right wing to insist on the importance of genes and the left wing people to insist on the importance of development, environment. So there are political issues behind this. And yes, you're right, science is made by humans, and humans have got all the qualities, but also all the defects. So science is only a human creation, it's a human thing. But yes, you're right, when you talk about sexual selection, about inheritance, when you realize that maybe the fact that my grandfather was intoxicated by something, I might have some trace of this, my grandfather was starved seriously for 2 years in a concentration camp or whatever you want, wherever you want, this can affect my health now. This is quite shocking. When we French are obsessed by our freedom, where is my freedom in that case? Okay, so clearly we have to discuss this. And when I say that we are, what we are, our phenotype, ourselves, is the byproduct of my own history, but also the history of my ancestors, recent and very old ones, there are plenty of consequences of this for society.
Yes, but this may be a little at the side of this discussion, but I was questioning about the issue that many times is confused about when we speak about genetics, we speak about determinism, which is not true. So thinking only about our own culture, I think that many times it's more dangerous, that the environment determines a lot our behavior, and we are brainwashed since kids. And so maybe it's not only the genes that define our behavior, but it's much more the society. And in that sense, I would say that this is an important reflection. So not the transmission, cultural transmission from the previous generation only, But the fact that when we are born, we already have a culture that many times can influence a lot. So this in the sense that sometimes it's that there's the idea that those that defend the genes are very, deterministic, and those that defend the environment is flexible. I think it's not like that.
Yeah, it's a good point. I agree that the society tends to interpret genes as determinism, like a kind of fate of mektub, we say people say in North Africa. Your destiny. Everything is written in your genes, so you don't have to fight against it, and so on. I agree that this is a distortion. It's a caricature of something I consider as a caricature of life. But any model is a caricature of life. So it's not a criticism, this is life. But a caricature of a caricature becomes a little bit distant from reality, too much. But yes, I can only agree with your point that we have to think about the philosophical consequences of all these things and try to understand what we can bring to the society in terms of the way we look at things, the way the decisions we take are influenced by our discoveries, by people's discoveries in biology. And I'm quite shocked, to be honest, by a fact that our societies now are spending about between 50 and 100 times more money in discovering new stars and so on, and than in understanding how we humans and how the globe is functioning. And this is something which is shocking to me, because we are on a train that is going faster and faster, and we are happy that we're going faster and faster, and we tend to ignore that the train, the rail ends at some stage, and we're going faster to this place, and we're happy of that. And we don't think about the consequences of our behavior now in the future. We're getting to global change, all these aspects which are important for the society. I don't want to mean that every science should be applied, certainly not. But it's important that fundamental science, basic science, also regularly thinks about the implications of what we're discovering, what we're studying. The micro is coming.
Sorry. So, just this. I'm extremely afraid of letting science determine politics. Because the Germans did it. It was not true science, we know that now. The Russians did it. It was not true science, and we know that now. What is true science? What we do? We hope so. You understand? So I'm quite contrary to the idea that, everybody should put the eyes into science and learn. I agree with what the no again said, in as much as, yes, there is a tendency to say the freedom lies in non-genetic determinism. But if you know anything about psychology and anthropology, you know that it is exactly the contrary. Culture is a kind of mind-removing mechanism, more or less like the penises of some insects that preempt all the sperm of the previous insect. So culture makes your mind and makes you say exactly what other people say. So I'm not at all happy with the idea that freedom lies in culture. It is exactly the opposite. Freedom lies in saying what you can say, what you say, what I say, what she says. Okay, that is real freedom. Okay.
Okay, agree. If I was misleading, please. Forgive me again, because I certainly don't say that. The interpretation is to think that genes is deterministic and no freedom. No, but I agree that scientific shouldn't be too much involved in politics. I agree with this. But we scientists, and particularly with the link, there is a philosopher here of science here, apparently, we working with philosophers, it's really important to work on how can
agree.
we translate this into something which is usable for the society?
I agree.
But it's certainly not us to decide. We're just experts, and it is down to the society and its institution, its functioning, its processes to decide, not us, certainly not.
Yes, okay,
Because I agree about what the Germans did with neo-Darwinism somehow. Well, social Darwinism, which is a kind of neo-Darwinism somehow. Call it the way you want.
Okay.
Thank you. Hello. I just like a question. I'm kind of curious, and I just want to take advantage of the fact there are plenty of experts here to ask. I would just like to ask about the behavior and its impact on evolution. So I would just like to ask by giving an example of us evolving from monkeys, and we started. One of the main, one of the most important things was starting to use tools. Right? We accept that as scientists. And basically that started with a behavior. When a certain monkey looked at a stick, and maybe I could throw this at an animal and kill it, for example. You know. And basically the children started using that as well. And basically, I think this created selective pressure because the monkeys which had better hands, you know, fingers with better dexterity, they could use tools more effectively, and that way, isn't this development of a characteristic based on behavior, which is completely, isn't this a form of Lamarckism, like behavior impacting a characteristic? Isn't this a Lamarck?
No, Lamarckism would start in its common sense now, which is quite different from what Lamarck said, because few people read Lamarck, but anyway, it would start to become Lamarckism in the current meaning if you added that it is transmitted genetically to the next or to the next generation. We know it can be this skill can be transmitted by education. And in apes, there are several examples of females watching their mothers doing a task, and they learn from their mothers, a bit like at school. But it's true that cultural transmission is a typical example of Lamarckist process, because if one generation invents a new thing, it transmits it to the next generation. If the rate of change is not too fast, and at the moment the rate of change is so fast that I just can't keep track.
Thank you.
Probably due to my age.
He was also asking about the hands, the selection over the hands.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But you were Susanna tells me that you were asking about the influence on the evolution of the hand as well. No?
This one evolution, thank you. This one evolution of the dexterity of the hands is basically based on a behavior, and although that is not transmitted, okay, I'm not using my hands, okay, I'm losing my hands a lot, for example, but that is not transmitted to my children, of course. But the behavior is there, and basically they are. There's a selective pressure that's occurring, right?
Because, definitely.
Yeah. So basically. Behavior had an impact on evolution, and it had an impact on genotype characteristic of a species, basically.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
If you wanted us to say, and I think us, because we would all agree, I think, to say that behavior is a really important process of evolution, involved in evolution, as behavioral ecologists, we would say, obviously, okay? We are all behavioral ecologists.
Okay, so the way an individual acts in the environment obviously affects everything else. So being simplistic, because otherwise the difference between individuals, that is basically what the natural selection is going to act upon, is not going to be visible. So many traits are defined in the way that the individual interacts with the environment. And in the case of humans, of course, the use of tools and is an important issue, right? And how did it develop? Probably many different processes at the same time or in a sequence. So the cognitive processes, the shape of the hand, the language, the evolution of language that might transmit this from generation to generation so that it could accumulate. So all processes are there, I think.
Okay, thank you.
But there is a detail, an important detail, is that when our ancestors were starting to use tools, and imagine an individual that starts to be very good at using his hand to throw rocks and other things, this strong hand will not be transmitted to his children, okay? Or this new ability he gained by learning himself and the kind of strength he has to do, this is not going to be inherited, okay? What he can transmit to his offspring is how to use the tool, but not the modification of his hand during his lifetime, okay? And the way the human hand evolved is the individuals that were born with a certain ability, with a certain type of hand, were more capable of throwing things. And if this had an effect on the survival and of these individuals, and if surviving was important to be able to breathe at a certain age, okay, the children of these individuals inherited a hand that gave more abilities to throw things, okay? So don't think that this individual will transfer to his children good muscles and things like that, okay? Do you understand the two processes?
I understand completely. I understand that it's not transmittable genetically. What I'm asking, not in a sense of what Lamarck said, because honestly I haven't read Lamarck, but in the idea that we have of Lamarck today, which the use of a certain thing has an impact and is going to be transmitted, so to speak. My question is, isn't this like, I understand, of course, it's not transmittable by hand, just because I use my hands a lot, I understand that's not going to be that's not going to be for my children. But what I'm saying is that behavior in the essence is what we understand as Lamarckism, isn't it? Like our behavior affects characteristics, and isn't that's it. Yeah, honestly, just isn't this true?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I slightly disagree, just for fun, with Susanna. It depends how when she says it's not transmitted. It depends how you define transmission. If it's parents, I started my talk this afternoon, the talk before this discussion. Defining terms. If you define inheritance, heredity as patterns of parent-offspring resemblance, and inheritance as the underlying mechanisms, then in that case you can say it's inherited, not through genes, but just through the fact that I teach my offspring to do the same thing and so on, and in the end it will have the same skill, it will resemble me. So it's just a matter of definition.
Just going to take advantage of the mic because we didn't evolve from monkeys. That's the forbidden phrase in evolutionary biology. So,
my question is about the units of evolution, the units of selection, and I wanted to know if you think that between the new synthesis and the alleged extended synthesis, there is a difference in which are considered to be the units of selection, and if, according to you, this difference is important for the status of the theory, that is, if for the possible shift from the new synthesis to the extended synthesis. Thank you.
Difficult question.
I'm a philosopher too.
No. I define a new concept of heritability, which I call inclusive heritability. That is heritability including everything, not only genetics, but all the processes of resemblance, paradox-free resemblance. And I explained how I defined this to the students before, but I think we also have to go to a new definition of fitness somehow, and this tackles the question of what is the unit of selection. I think, again, you've got it depends on the question you're asking. I remember a discussion when I was in Paris about 20 years ago between geneticists and behavioral ecologists, and a geneticist would say that he would never understand a phenotypic definition of fitness. For him, there was only one definition of fitness, which was genetics. Okay, this is an extreme vision, a provocative vision of the thing, but clearly, depending on the question you ask, and the way you analyze or you phenotype the individuals, the answer might differ. But clearly, if we accept that inheritance involves more than the transmission of genes, some cultural components, some epigenetic processes might be intricated together, we need to broaden our definition of fitness as well. But the problem is that the term inclusive fitness has already been used in a different context, and we stole the term inclusive from that term. So, in terms of, yeah, it's true that we have to think about what is the unit of selection. There are some models that shows that with cultural inheritance, it tends to homogenize the behavior of the people within the group, and all the variation in the meta-population is among groups. Okay, so and the paper is by Laurent Lehmann. In Geneva or no, in Lausanne, it was at that time. He concludes saying that it leads to the emergence of a new unit of selection, which is a group sharing the same behavior.
Sorry, that it's not new. It's not new because this is a discussion that has been for over 50 years or more. So units of selection can be at several levels, right? So one of them is the selection at level of the group, and which is discussed since Wilson, since the 40s, the 50s, maybe? 60s, yeah. So, but that was just the rest. I agree entirely with you. So it depends on the question. So you can have a selection at the level of the gene, or at the level of mitochondria, or at the level of the individual, at the level of a family, if you use inclusive fitness, at the level of the group, or even at the level of the species. So it depends. Maybe the more important question is, what is the more important level? And I think there's no answer to that either. And that's being discussed a lot. So the selection at the group level selection is one particular issue that I see that there's still no agreement about that. What is relevance about the selection at the level of the group?
Yeah, but the argument of people who are for or against the group selection is they don't think that it needs a rethink of evolutionary biology in order to decide what the answer is.
Yeah, and if I can add something, that was actually my question to the no party. That is, if we admit a lot of things if we add a lot of things to the new synthesis, such as, I don't know, niche construction theories, etc., at a certain point we have probably a lot of level of selection more than in the new synthesis. So my question was how many parts we can add to a theory and still say that we are in the same theory.
Yeah, but that was my point. So when you consider that there are several levels of selection, and this was stated by Lewontin in 1970, you are already considering niche construction, for instance, at the level of the family or at the level of the group. So all those levels were already there. So the issue is more the importance of each one, but it's all there already.
I don't think that niche construction theory can be reduced to group selection.
It depends.
It's connected here.
Yeah, if you work in a society, it will be at the level of the group. If you work in a family, it's at the level
For
of the
instance,
family.
think of termite mounds
termites.
or honeybee colonies. You have a group and you have a modification of the environment. You have niche construction, and this is part of
depends on which
evolutionary
niche.
biology since the 70s.
Yeah, it depends on which niche theory you buy into, I think.
Yeah, it depends on your terminology, because people were talking about termite mounds and animal building without using the term niche construction.
But it was there
But
already.
it was there.
But may I make a comment about this argument which is used about this is not new. This is true. It's not new. Nothing is new. We are always reinventing the wheel, definitely. But,
No.
But how is it? May I finish?
Yeah.
How is it that when I submit papers like this, I can have sentences written by referees, which I quote word to word, either the authors are idiots, comma, or they play the idiot, dot, period, and you are on your bike. Okay, so yes, it's true, people have been saying a lot of things, but it's not been incorporated. And in the last 20, 30 years, the modern syntheses have shrunk to genes only, sequence, DNA sequence. And in any studies, people will say, well, I can show this is transmitted, so the next step is what? I sequence the organism. I look for the genes of this, for autism and so on. And now we've got plenty of reasons. And physicians, they know that it doesn't work. They have got patients in front of them. And they don't know how to cure them, because they've got this obsession about genes. And they invite me a lot, by the way, because they know that there might be something interesting for them. And when you look at obesity, obesity is a huge problem for humanity at the moment. And they've been estimating, I was in a conference with medical scientists 3 weeks ago, and they are estimating, they call it non-communicable illness. They are estimating that about 500 million people are overloaded in the world. And the big problem is that this is inherited. Offspring from parents with high overloaded will be overloaded, and probably more overloaded, and accumulates across generations. And they are scared by this problem. They think it is a huge problem. And just go to the States, and you'll, in a few minutes in New York, you will realize it's a real problem. And we have to accept that, yes, we know this, but we say, well, it's there, but this is secondary. All the time I've been heard, you're not the first to say it. Yes, of course, but I want you to take into account in your equations. And the graphs I showed you about the way inheritance is viewed by the modern synthesis and the way I propose it should be viewed in the inclusive evolutionary synthesis, I think it's quite obvious that the things are not the same. Well, if I cannot find a stronger argument than that one to convince you that something is different. I don't mean it's a revolution. I don't care about revolution. The term, I don't care about it. I want to stick to the fact, the truth. The truth, as much as we can estimate it today. Maybe in a few years we will show that this study was crap. But in that case, you will have to say this for many studies that are being published in Cell, impact factor of 50 or something like this, etc., because these papers are full of them. They don't care about the modern synthesis. They see facts, and they report about it.
Thank you very much.
Sorry to be a bit tense.
So, basically, what the yes is saying is that we don't need to destroy the structure like it was used. You just want to improve it in a way that students can learn from it in a much better way, right? And as a student, I really approve that, because if you are studying something and you have a lot of visions and different ways to approach something, for example, for me, this was new. Everything I learned today was new. I never heard of it in the way I heard today. And in that fact, I think that yes, it's all about genes, but why don't we learn how those genes are affected or altered? That was it.
Just to tease you and to, because I'm jealous of your age, as I said at the end of my talk. Everything is new for young people, and they are open to this, and this is great. This is why I'm always eager to teach and to explain this to the student, because they are much less conformist than we adults. But the fact it is new doesn't mean that it is true. So you have to make your own opinion about it, to build it. And only the future, and when you are old and in my position, maybe you'll say, well, in fact, it was completely wrong, this guy. No problem. This is science. Okay? You have to build your own opinion. Newity doesn't mean truth.
I subscribe completely. Yep. So that's why I want the examples.
Okay, so having listened to all this talk, I have a two-part question that I would like all the 4 members to comment.
Oh,
so, for hearing this, after all this debate, I think that what the thing that separates the most the one side and the other is the relative weight of non-genetic inheritance in the evolutionary processes, because as many of you have claimed, these are not new ideas, these are not new concepts, these are things that have been described for many, many years. So what I would like to ask is, A, do you agree with this sentence, that what separates the left side from the right side is the relative weight of non-genetic inheritance in evolution? And B, which do you think is the relative weight? Do you think that the relative weight of these processes is dependent on the level that we are talking about, on the complexity of the organisms, in all this variability across biological levels?
Okay, well, as you might have gathered, the no side would argue that the main level, the main thing is genetic inheritance, with all those caveats that the phenotype is a construction, reacts on the environment, is reacted upon on by the environment, etc. On the B part, I would say that the importance of non-genetic inheritance will probably depend on the organism. And it's not probably a coincidence that we humans, who have a language and a very complex culture, are particularly for us, non-genetic inheritance will probably more important than for any other organism. So I think that summarizes the...
Yes, of course. So I subscribe what Teresa is saying. And I was trying to find... I'm particularly interested in examples, right? Because the fact that it can happen is one thing. The importance that it has is another. And I think that what is at stake is the importance and not the fact that you can have non-genetic inheritance. I'm thinking more about cultural inheritance, which is obvious. I am speaking only about the other part. And I was considering what might be one interesting thing. And one interesting result might be to have a puzzling result so I do experimental evolution. And I'm a little bit Fisherian, by the way. So Fisher was very simplistic versus you're right, and that's why I spoke about epistasis is also a domain of discussion. But the thing is that his ideas work very well. So we make predictions when we make an experiment, an evolutionary experiment, and it goes to several levels, and learning is one of them, and learning in Drosophila can be done. And the thing is that there hasn't been any result, as I reckon, that has been puzzling in terms of changes in transmissible changes that were not expected by the quantitative genetics of the model. So, which means that the heritability in the classic sense, in general, functions a lot. So, my question is a little bit about that. So basically, I would say that the more important is the genetic inheritance, basically.
So that's a good question. That's an important question. I published papers about this. I said a few words in my lecture before this discussion. A classic reaction I have is, well, you're right, Etienne. You're right. Don't make a fuss about it. It's just a matter of a few percent. And my reaction is that there are two mistakes in this. The first one is in claiming that 2% is negligible. And the second is that it might be much more than a few percent. And the argument comes from DNA sequencing. We now have such good tools in terms of describing genetic variations. There are papers in humans that use more than 12 million SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, in populations to describe. And what they found all the time, the same result is that this extremely fine-grained description of the genotype, genetic variation, doesn't explain a high fraction of heritability, of transmission. And there is a puzzle. There is a paper that was published in 2008 in Nature called The Case of the Missing Heritability. Okay? And this paper has triggered a lot of discussions about it. And clearly, we have fantastic tools to describe genetics, and when we use it, we can't reconstruct the inheritance we find at the population level. What explains this? It's an enigma. And the
No, I'm sorry, I cannot let you go on with that, because you know exactly what happens. It's not the DNA sequence per se, it's the genes, it's gene expression, so it's
of course,
epistasis.
Yes, right.
So all that is genetic inheritance. All that is in our side.
Gene expression.
Not a puzzle, okay?
Gene expression is epigenetics. It's not genetics. It's not engraved into the genes. Sorry about that, but
yeah, of course, because
this is an argument I always listen. Here it's wrong. Sorry. Clearly. So anyway, people have argued about this. I've discussed about it, and one explanation to this problem is that the population estimates we have of heritability are inflated by non-genetic inheritance. And there are many examples of this. And so this is just this. So part of the explanation is this. But it's clear and agree somehow that the estimation by what is called GWAS, Genome-Wide Association Studies, creates a lot of problems. But people have modeled about this. And in the best case, they can explain up to 80% of the inheritance. And still, there is 20% unexplained, and 20% is much more than 2%. So the matter, it might be much more important than we think, and we tend to qualify of genetic everything which is transmitted. And if we did this with language, we say, well, it's highly transmitted. The inheritance is 1, so it's genetics. And immediately we'd say, well, but it's not true. We know that it is learned from the parents. And I would say immediately, yes, you're right. But the problem is that all the other cases, you don't know what is the mechanism of transmission. And you systematically interpret it in terms of genetics. But it might be something different. It might be not linked to the DNA sequence. Okay? So clearly, the case of the missing heritability is a real example that shows it might be more important. But even if it is just a few percent, it's a really wrong mistake to state that this is secondary. There are many models that shows that a few errors, or a few percent errors, is enough to completely change the dynamics of the system. So maybe the difference is there. But you seem to put me in the yes part of this paper. I don't belong to this. I reiterate this. I don't belong to this. I'm not in the yes. This is, what I say, it's not my role to decide if it is a change, a deep change. It's someone else. I'm too involved in this to be able to say something about it.
Maybe in the third round.
I would like to finish with a phrase from Lewontin, who said about another kind of revolution which was punctuated equilibrium, and he had discussions with Gould about that. And he said that basically It's all arguments on the factory floor between workers, but the factory was built by Charles Darwin.
Professora Susana?
Exatamente.